Alright, hello everyone. Welcome to our first lesson for this unit on World War II. This lesson is for May 15th. So we have our objectives and standards here. Analyze how Germany was successful in the early stages of the war, and evaluate policies of aid used by the United States. And you can take a look at the standards too, please. Alright, so we have three vocabulary words for this lesson. Non-aggression pact, which we talked about a little bit prior to last week when we had the PSSA testing. So we did talk about this word a little bit. We'll go into it a little bit in depth for today. But it is an agreement between the Soviet Union and Germany not to not attack the other. Blitzkrieg, which is also the lightning war that used airplanes, soldiers, and tanks to surprise attack and overwhelm enemies. And we also have the Atlantic Charter, which was a resolution by the US and Great Britain that declared free trade for all nations and the right of people to choose their own government. So think about this. Would you be willing to aid your allies if it meant the possibility of your country being drawn into a war? Yes, no, or you're not sure. And our central question, how was Germany successful in the early stages of World War II? Okay, so war begins again. So the Soviet Union and Germany signed a non-aggression pact. Again, we talked about this a little bit previously, but just to kind of refresh your memories and go over it again a little bit. But this non-aggression pact would allow these two countries to work together and then be able to split Poland among themselves. Okay. Also, the Soviet Union was going to be receiving Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, and Finland. They would also be controlled by the USSR. So war finally arrived again on September 1st, 1939. At dawn, Poland was invaded on September 1st, 1939. Sorry, that's a little repetition there. German tanks and troops moved across the country as German airplanes bombed from above. So this is a new tactic used by Germany, which you just saw in the vocab, known as Blitzkrieg. Okay, it's this fast-moving tactic of, basically surprise attacking, your enemy or whoever you're trying to invade quickly. They have, no warning of it basically, and it's successful. Germany is successful at this. After Poland falls to Germany, France and Great Britain declared war on Germany on September 3rd, but Poland had already been taken over, so it was a little late, but France and Great Britain still responded by declaring war. Okay, so like I just said, this invasion was a test of Germany's strategy known as Blitzkrieg, and the strategy was efficient. On September 17th, 1939, Stalin had his troops occupy the eastern half of Poland, and Germany will control the western half. Like we said, they were going to divide Poland between each other. Stalin also took control of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. However, the Soviets faced some resistance in the country of Finland. They weren't expecting a fight, but they did kind of run into some difficulty there. So in November 1939, Stalin decided to send more troops to Finland, and he expects a quick victory. But the Finnish troops, they were fierce. Despite being outnumbered and outgunned, they were very hard fighters. And one of the unique things I kind of learned about too was that soldiers on skis were actually attacking Soviet troops in the freezing winter. So you had soldiers on skis attacking these German soldiers. Unfortunately, in May 1940, Finland will be forced to surrender to the Soviet Union. All right, awaiting war. So after declaring war, the British and the French mobilized their armies, right? They get ready for war. They placed troops at the fortifications known as the Maginot Line, which was this border between Germany and France, okay? And then basically they're going to wait for an attack by the Germans, and they wait and they wait and they wait, and both sides kind of became bored, and some people even began to call this the phony war because they were just soldiers just kind of sitting around waiting and waiting for something to happen or for fighting or something. So it was a little bit of a waiting war for a little bit. Okay, the fighting starts again. April 9th, 1940, Germany launched a surprise attack against Denmark and Norway. Okay, Denmark fell in a few hours, and Norway will surrender 2 months after that. The goal of this is that the Germans want to build bases, and they do begin to build bases along the coast of Norway as well as Denmark, so they can launch an attack on Great Britain. Remember, Great Britain's an island, so they can't really kind of, march across the border, like they did with some of these other countries. So they need to build or set up some type of plan to be able to launch an attack against Great Britain. So while that is going on, let's talk about France. Also in May 1940, Germany gained control of Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and Belgium. Now, Hitler is going to use these countries as well to launch an attack against France. While he's, while he's invading these other countries and the Allies are focused on that, Hitler is going to use the Ardennes. Now, the Ardennes is a heavily wooded section of Europe. It's part of northern France, Belgium, and Luxembourg. He's going to move his troops through this heavily, wooded forest to invade France. Like I said, while the Allies were focused on, other invasions that were going on. So he kind of sneaks in there a little bit. When the German forces reached the French coast, they joined other German troops in Belgium. So they're kind of, again, coming in and closing in on France from both sides. The German military was able to surround Allied forces in France, who were then forced to retreat to the beaches of what is called Dunkirk. Okay, the Allied forces were trapped and needed rescue. Again, they're trapped between pretty much the water and their enemy forces here. So Great Britain sent a fleet of ships of every type, both military and civilian. So they tell every boat, hey, get over there and rescue these guys. So even like fishermen, even like rowboats, like anybody who could get there to help the soldiers. Okay. And the boats were able to transport troops out of harm's way. So this is kind of a little bit of an embarrassment. I don't want to say embarrassment, but it's a little bit of a letdown for the Allied forces because they have to kind of, retreat in this hurry, and it's a pretty hectic retreat and escape. So it was a little bit of a setback for the Allies. Okay, so the fall of France. So after Dunkirk, there was little resistance from the French. By June 14th, 1940, Germany had captured Paris, and on June 22nd, 1940, France will surrender to Germany. Now, Germany took control of the northern part of France while they set up this kind of puppet government in southern France, which was just like, they were French who controlled the southern part of France, but they were more, not so, I mean, they were French, but there were others, but they were supporters of the Nazis, so that's how they divided France. Now, there was a French general named Charles de Gaulle. He's going to establish a government in exile, so he's going to, be in London, sending messages to the French people, urging them to continue fighting and resisting. And many of the French people do. I don't want you to think that many of the French people just kind of stopped fighting and things like that. There was French resistance throughout the war, which was successful. So the people of France, they may be out, but they may be down, I should say, but they're not out. Okay, battling Britain. After the fall of France, Great Britain stood alone against German forces. Now, the United States really doesn't want to get involved in the war yet, so Great Britain is kind of the only one that stands against Germany at this point, and Italy for that matter. The Prime Minister of Great Britain, Winston Churchill, he vows to defend the country. Like I said, Hitler is going to turn his goals towards defeating the British. He decided he needed to knock out the Royal Air Force, or the RAF, first. And this is, a big deal to him. And then, once he was able to take out the British Air Force, he would be able to land troops on the shores of the country. So, airplane fight. In the summer of 1940, Germany's Air Force, the Luftwaffe, began bombing Great Britain. Okay. Now, at first, Germany focused on military sites like airfields and factories that made airplanes. But then, in September, on September 7th, 1940, the cities in Great Britain began to be bombed, especially London. And the goal of this was to break the spirits of the British people. Obviously when you're having your cities and your homes bombed, the goal was to hopefully break, just the morale and spirit of the British. Now, despite these attempts, and despite a large loss of life and property and things like that, they remained strong. The British remained hanging in there. So the Royal Air Force was outnumbered, but they fought back hard. Two of the things that helped the British fight back were radar. The new invention of radar that had recently come out allowed them to detect airplanes and things like that when these bombing missions by the Germans were going to happen. And the Enigma, a machine that broke the German secret code, allowed them to be successful. So when they captured this machine, it allowed them to, know the German plans basically. So those two things definitely helped the British be able to kind of survive during these attacks. When Germany learns of radar, they begin doing these nighttime bombings in hopes that they won't be able to be detected successfully. So they began bombing night bombings in October 1940. So while British citizens fled to air raid shelters for cover, or some stuck it out in their homes, but a lot of people are going to go to these air raid shelters in subway tunnels or wherever else. The Battle of Great Britain is going to rage over the sky, so people can literally walk outside their house and see airplanes fighting above their head. Now, the Battle of Britain will come to a conclusion on May 10th, 1941, when Hitler decides that he's going to call off the attacks. He decides they're not getting anywhere, this is just, a waste of resources and men. So he decides that, he's going to call off the attacks on Great Britain. So the fight for North Africa. So Hitler became frustrated with the fight against the British, so he turned to other goals. Germany's first objective in the Mediterranean region was North Africa. Mussolini had invaded Egypt in September 1940 with goals of capturing the Suez Canal. Now, the reason for this is he wanted access to the oil fields in the Middle East. Now, the Italians were able to push Great Britain's forces back in the beginning, but by December 1940, the British began fighting back themselves. So as the Italians are kind of suffering, and struggling against the British, Adolf Hitler is now, excuse me, he's now forced to help the Italians, which he really didn't want to get involved kind of right away. So, he kind of has to go help his buddy, basically. So he sends his German tank force to the region under a man by the name General Erwin Rommel. Okay, and this Africa Corps was very successful, and they forced the British into retreat. So thanks to Rommel and the Africa Corps with these tanks, the Germans are able to kind of push the British back a little bit. So Rommel becomes known as the Desert Fox because of his success. He's very sneaky. He's got a lot of military tactics. So that's his nickname, is the Desert Fox. All right, so the Balkans. Or Balkans, I'm sorry, I should say. Hitler decided he was going to attack his ally, the Soviet Union, in early 1941. So to do this, the German leader named the Balkan countries in the region of southeastern Europe. So Hitler was able to persuade Romania, Bulgaria, and Hungary to join the Axis powers. He was able to invade Yugoslavia and Greece, which had refused to kind of be part of the Axis, I guess, and was able to capture them in a short period of time too. So again, Hitler has this kind of these countries that he controls now that he's able to launch an attack against the Soviet Union. So invading the USSR. So after capturing the Balkans, Hitler moved ahead with his plan to invade the Soviet Union. The plan was called Operation Barbarossa, and it happened on June 22nd, 1941, was when Germany began its invasion. So the Germans pushed further into the country, and as they did this, the Soviets destroyed as well as burned items in the path of the enemy. So they destroy, property, livestock, everything. And you may remember that the Russians had done this before when Napoleon invaded Russia back in the 1800s. This is known as scorched earth policy. We talked about that a little bit. So the Soviets are going to use this again. So the city of Leningrad came under siege on September 8th, 1941. So completely cut off from the rest of the country, the city was bombed and attacked, while citizens were forced to eat everything, including rats and horses. So, these people in the city are surrounded and cut off from the rest of their country. They're running low on supplies, so they had to eat a lot of pretty nasty stuff. and nearly 1 million people are going to die in Leningrad during that winter of 1941 to 1942. But again, the city still held strong, and the Germans, were unable to take it right away. So again, Hitler grows frustrated and impatient. Again, he wants to keep moving. He doesn't want to wait. So he set his sights on Moscow, which was the heart and capital of the country. So German forces reached the outskirts of the city by December, and Hitler ordered no retreat. He tells them, do not retreat. And so the troops dug in, the German forces dug in, I should say. And they stayed there until about March 1943. In the long run, the advance on the Soviet Union gained Hitler nothing. He didn't gain any territory, really didn't gain much from the invasion of the Soviet Union. The only thing he gained was, unfortunately, I shouldn't say unfortunately, but you know what I mean, it was a loss of lives. It was 500,000 lives were lost because of this invasion and this attempt to take over the Soviet Union. All right, let's talk about the U.S. So like we just said, most Americans believe that the nation should stay out of the war. Between 1935 and 1937, the U.S. Congress had passed neutrality acts. We talked about that a little bit too previously, how it was illegal to sell weapons or anything like that to countries at war or give them loans. So we did talk about that a little bit. But President Roosevelt knew that the country could be drawn into a war if the other allies fell. So he took steps to help support the Allies in their fight. In September 1939, Roosevelt asked Congress to allow the Allies to buy arms made in America. So he says, countries can buy arms from America. The Allies would pay cash for these items and then carry the supplies on their own ships back to their country. So again, the United States is not really, we're kind of playing a mediator, but we're not really becoming involved in the war at this point. In March 1941, the Lend-Lease Act allowed the lending or leasing of arms and supplies to any country that was vital to the United States, so places like Great Britain, obviously a big one, but lending and leasing these arms and supplies so that way we could protect our interest around the world as well. So although the U.S. had not officially entered the war yet, Roosevelt and Churchill, met in secret. And they issued a resolution that was known as the Atlantic Charter, and we talked about it in the vocab preview. This was a resolution saying that the countries of the world are open to free trade, and that countries have a right to pick their own government. On September 4th, 1941, a German U-boat fired on the United States destroyer. And after this, President Roosevelt orders Navy commanders to shoot any German submarines on sight. So this is now kind of like an unofficial war between the U.S. and Germany. So even though we didn't officially declare war on Germany, Roosevelt tells people, hey, if you see a German submarine, you don't wait, just open fire. But this will not be the main event that will bring the United States into the war. That will come from another country, and some of you may know about Pearl Harbor, so we'll talk about that in our next lesson. But the event that draws the U.S. into the war officially will be from Japan. All right, so I just kind of broke this up a little bit for you. So remember that Germany started a new military strategy known as Blitzkrieg that allowed them to conquer a lot of their goals. And Hitler and his forces were able to capture most of Europe through this strategy. He was able to capture France. He was able to capture a lot of other places. But he did struggle against Great Britain in the Battle of Britain. Hitler also used his tank force in North Africa with the successes of Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox. That's a picture of him there. But the invasion of the USSR, the Soviet Union, was a struggle for Germany. Okay, so remember that Hitler was kind of unsuccessful at taking that territory. And then finally, the U.S. took steps to assist their friends in the struggle. That's a picture of FDR there on the left and Winston Churchill on the right, them meeting during the Atlantic Charter. So Germany and the United States also began an unofficial war on the Atlantic Ocean. But again, the United States will not officially enter the war until December 1941, a couple of months later. All right, guys. Well, that's all I have for this lesson. So please answer the questions. Again, remember you will get extra credit for doing the lessons this week with Keystones. So please make sure you answer the questions, and I will see and talk to you soon.